Welcome. This is Deep Dive featuring Hudson Institute. And from here in Jerusalem, I'm more than glad to introduce my panelists for today here in body and form. No other than Dr. Mike Duran, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, where he's also the director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East, formerly a senior director at the White House for North Africa and the Middle East. It's always a pleasure to have you with us here, Mike.
Great to be here. Thank you, Jonathan.
Well, I'd like to immediately dive into the fact that today marks day 500 since the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates launched their heinous crimes against Israel on October 7th of 2023. Looking at those horrendous events, what comes to mind?
What's mainly on my mind is where do we go next? I know we now have the Trump administration in place. Of course, Donald Trump doesn't have all of his officers in place, but he's in place, and he's moving in a new direction. And I'm watching carefully to try to understand exactly what that direction is. We had the trip to Washington of Prime Minister Netanyahu and his team. It looked to me that they primarily discussed Iran and Gaza. I have some other things on my mind, namely Syria. It looked to me, and I say all this hesitantly because I'm watching to see what the signs are. It looked to me like President Trump signaled that he wants a negotiation with Iran and that he's in no rush to attack the Iranian nuclear program. I think that my assumption is that Prime Minister Netanyahu had that as on the top of his list, and then President Trump unveiled his plan for Gaza, which I think was probably a big surprise to the Israelis. So they're trying to figure out what does the Gaza plan mean for them. Mm-hmm. And those are, I think, the big things. I think that if you look at it from Jerusalem's point of view, the Israelis used to say that they have three concerns: Iran, Iran, and Iran. Now I think they have three concerns there: Iran, Gaza, and Syria. And there's a kind of a question mark over every one of those.
With Syria, of course, the extension also being Lebanon, and the ramifications for Jordan, and the implications, of course, for Iraq. Everything is connected.
And of course, Turkey is a big part of that as well.
So let's start actually with the main topic, not the most dangerous topic, namely Iran, but rather the Gaza Strip. Mm. President Trump subsequently came out and provided an ultimatum saying Saturday noon, either Hamas releases all of the hostages, not in various installments of small threes or twos of hostages being released every Saturday, but all of them in one bulk, or else the gates of hell will break loose in the Middle East. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government, the Security Cabinet, unanimously adopted, according to him, the position of President Trump, and yet the moment arrived and business as usual.
Right.
What happened?
Yeah, I can only speculate, but what I think Prime Minister Netanyahu probably made the calculation that if he goes to war or reopens major conflict with Hamas, there's no guarantee that that's going to force Hamas to give up all of the hostages, and that what he has a reasonable hope of getting is the hostages that Hamas promised to deliver in this phase of the agreement. The agreement has 3 phases, and he's got about 5 more hostages to have released under this phase. And I think he probably calculated that he could get those. And that's very important to him because he's under domestic political pressure to bring as many hostages home as possible.
Well, not many. Those hostages were taken captive by this Islamist terror group under his watch. So naturally, he's also very eager to see them returned as speedily as possible, as healthy as possible. Unfortunately, the majority are not alive. But within that calculus, I do wonder, and of course, there are a lot of question marks that we can't really answer at this point. But how does Trump look at this from his perspective, saying, I established an ultimatum, I gave Israel an out, nevertheless, in a last moment, they did decide to take that out. Does this reflect on Trump?
I don't think so. I think if we're thinking about it in terms of his own domestic political constituency, I think that he is presenting the profile that he wants to present to them, and the Israeli calculations or the Israeli decisions don't reflect on that in any way.
Very interesting indeed. Well, yesterday on Sunday morning, we saw some 1,800 munitions of heavy load explosives arriving following the Italian strike, as you wrote in your known article.
The embargo.
The embargo by the Biden administration. It's officially done with. Is Israel gaining now the qualitative military edge that it requires in order to confront all the various adversaries, including the head of the octopus, namely the Islamic Republic of Iran, in the event that this erupts?
I think the end of the embargo, which was never officially announced by the Biden administration, it strengthens Israel's hand, but I don't think it gives it the decisive edge that it needs, because what the Iranians developed over the Israelis was this ability to tax their air defense systems. What the Iranians can do is unleash very large numbers of missiles against Israel all at once. And in order to defend against that, Israel needs the help of the United States. And that I think is the key pressure that the Iranians put on the Israelis was, well, actually there are two pressure points. One was the defense industrial capability of the Israelis. The Israelis don't have enough interceptors that they can make on their own to foil a massive Iranian barrage. They need the help of the Americans, and they also need the entire system, the detection system that they get through CENTCOM. And the second thing that the Iranians developed was basically this political pressure by the Americans on the Israelis to hold back. And I don't know that the political pressure has disappeared. It's not the same. It's not the same at all as it was under Biden.
Well, the Iranians have less sway on the Republicans than they do on the Democrats.
Except the Iranians are launching a charm offensive right now, and they're telling Donald Trump that he can solve they're signaling that there's a possibility of solving the nuclear threat without another war, and so that creates political pressure on the Israelis to hold back for the moment.
With the Iranians at their weakest point, since I remember at least, are they going to succumb to American demands under the current administration, or will it be yet another drag of the feet, so to speak, in a prolonged negotiated process that ultimately may result in an outcome that we don't necessarily want to see?
So I assume that the Iranians will do what they have always done in the past with the United States, and that's negotiate in order to buy time, not in order to get to an agreement that will have a lasting understanding between Washington and Tehran. I don't think they believe in such a thing. They might come to some kind of agreement, like a JCPOA 2.0. It's possible to imagine that, but the goal from the Iranian point of view is to buy time in order to build up their defenses and to build up their stockpiles of ballistic missiles again.
Indeed. Well, we did see a couple of shipments of necessary chemicals for the purpose of reinvigorating their ballistic missiles program, coming into Iran to the Bandar Abbas port from China, which is indicative, of course, of their intentions. But beyond that, the Iranians are very active when we're talking about the various proxies under their sway in order to try and rehabilitate those who've been destroyed, going from the Islamist Hamas to the meetings that the RGC just held last week with the officers from the fallen Assad regime that withdrew into Iraq and of course, have united themselves with Hashd al-Shabi, or the Popular Mobilization Forces, that are very strong still in Iraq. But within all that, and this is quite apparent, they're not talking about Gaza other than their regular rhetoric. They are meeting with the leadership of Hamas, but they haven't really addressed President Trump's plan for the Gaza Strip. They're taking a backseat to the Arab world, looking at them actually doing their bidding when we're talking about the United States vis-a-vis Israel and the Gaza Strip. How do you see that?
Yeah, there's definitely a major Israeli achievement since October 7th is the weakening of the Iranians. And they were leading, after October 7th, the global ceasefire movement, and they used all of their proxies in a coordinated military action against Israel, creating this ring of fire around Israel, saying that when there's a ceasefire in Gaza, one that will leave Hamas in place, then Israel will no longer be attacked by Hezbollah from Lebanon. International shipping won't be attacked by the Houthis, and so on. And they were, of course, supported by the rest of the global ceasefire movement, including some Europeans, even people on American universities, and so on. And they said there's no way they will ever stop attacking Israel until there is what they want in Gaza. Now they are pulling back, as you say, taking a back seat, because their number one concern is that they are naked before an Israeli attack. They don't have the air defenses to protect them. So yes, they are looking to build up their arsenal of ballistic missiles, but they can't get air defenses. There are only two powers who could possibly give them air defenses. One is Russia, which doesn't seem to be doing it because it's taxed in Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin sees Donald Trump moving toward him on Ukraine, I mean, in comparison to where Biden was. And Putin doesn't want to give Trump any reason not to put pressure on Zelensky.
Right.
So he's not going to rush to rebuild the Iranian defenses. The Chinese are hesitant, I think, to get involved directly in this kind of their modus operandi in the past has been to be the enabler of the Russian and Iranian military machines through things like you're saying, providing chemicals, providing the Russians with machines to build weapons, but not the actual weapons. They haven't engaged in that. So Iran has to create its own defenses, and the Israelis already have an answer to all of those. So this is their big dilemma. That's why they have to buy time.
Interesting. Well, let's actually one more point on this. When we looked this past Saturday at the 3 hostages being released, there was a writing on the wall that referenced President Trump's plan, in which it said, we will not be, or we won't leave Gaza or get displaced elsewhere other than Jerusalem. And then in basically a reference where in Arabic it's more understood, where they say, we won't stop until we conquer Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Is that something that is taken seriously by the United States, by European actors for that matter, and by Israel, considering the fact that the only ones who understand the necessity to eradicate Hamas, which is not an easy task to do since it is a social movement, requires a more vigorous response than what we've seen to date.
I don't know that that anyone in Europe is thinking that way. I don't think anyone in the American national security establishment is thinking that way. Only the Israelis, and not all of the Israelis for that matter. And when I say all of the Israelis, I'm talking about all of the Israelis in the security establishment. They're not all thinking about eradicating. So Donald Trump's plan for Gaza, it opens the possibility of changing the reality on the ground, but there is not yet. It's really an idea rather than a plan. We don't have in place all of the different actors who can implement it, including the Israelis. As long as the Israeli government is focused on completing at least this first stage of the hostage agreement, it's not putting in place the mechanisms, military and otherwise, to implement, to put flesh on the bones of Trump's idea.
Very interesting indeed. Well, let's keep it on Iran, but nonetheless with focus on the prospects of an Israeli strike, or potentially even an American-Israeli strike. You said you're not seeing that necessarily. There's a diplomatic process that Trump really aspires to. Nevertheless, if they're going to drag their feet long enough, this calculus may change.
If the Iranians drag their feet long enough, then the American calculus may change. Absolutely. Trump said that an Iranian nuclear weapon is unacceptable. So the United States will not allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. He is, however, clearly willing to negotiate with the Iranians about ending their program. Exactly what he's going to define as proof that they've ended their program, and whether they're going to sit down with him on terms that are acceptable to him, we don't know answers to any of that yet. We have to wait and see what happens. But clearly, he has prioritized. I think clearly, I have to be careful with my language. Right. I think it's pretty clear that he has prioritized negotiations ahead of the use of any military force. So, from an Israeli point of view, this is leaving money on the table, because there's an opportunity right now to destroy Iran's nuclear program with very low risk. I think it's about
the diminished cost
yes,
of such an activity.
Yeah, a year ago, it would have seemed like there would be a very high cost. Now we've seen Iran through everything that it has at Israel, and it wasn't enough to really harm Israel in any way. Iran cannot really harm the United States in any way. So there's no reason why, this is from the Israeli point of view, there's no reason why Israel and the United States have to tolerate all of this aggressive action by Iran and its proxies all around the Middle East. But Donald Trump is not seeing it that way. At least the early indications are that he's not seeing it that way.
Right. I do see some similarities to the previous Trump administration when he was the 45th, where he scrapped the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, despite not being comprehensive at all. But nonetheless, after scrapping it, he said, I'm looking forward to negotiate a new deal, a longer one, a stronger one, a more substantive agreement, right, without a termination date, with a sunset clause and such. The Iranians rejected it outright. Even the Europeans rejected it outright, with President Obama coming out and saying, well, of course our deal was not perfect, but better a bad deal than no deal at all. Well,
right.
I don't.
And then the left and the Europeans, maybe I repeat myself, they said that all of the difficulties that ensued from scrapping the deal were the result of scrapping it.
Right, rather than them having a bad deal,
yeah,
and Iran being a bad actor.
Yes.
Which is
right.
the fundamental basics to everything.
Right.
But
yes, I agree with you. There's real continuity there. And President Trump looks at the world economically. I mean, this should be should be obvious to us now, but you see it in Gaza. I mean, he talks about the economic potential of Gaza, of developing Gaza, of changing the reality through mainly economic activity. The same is true with Iran. He sees the major pressure on Iran to be economic. He's reinstated maximum pressure, and he wants to try to create a new reality with Iran on the basis of economic pressure. The economics always takes precedence in President Trump's mind before military action.
Well, the previous time the maximum pressure campaign brought Iran to their knees in just 1 year of enforcement. Now President Trump has 4 years. I don't think the regime will survive something like this unless they play ball, but we'll have to wait and see. It has to be a whole of government approach. Let's move to the next topic. Tomorrow is the date in which Israel is expected to disengage from Lebanon. What do you...
Sorry, I'm responding to your line in my mind. There are three things that I never predict in the Middle East. I never predict the demise of Benjamin Netanyahu. I never predict the demise of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and I never predict the demise of the Iranian regime. We have to assume that these things are going to be with us.
And that's why I said, and if I may quote myself, I'm not sure they will survive.
Right, yeah.
I didn't say anything definitive, but I agree. I agree. We need to wait and see. They are very well organized in order to try and survive. That is their top priority. Going back to Lebanon, tomorrow is the date of the disengagement of IDF forces based on the extension of the agreement that was arranged by the United States, of course, with Israel, with the state of Lebanon, and with the French. Hezbollah is seemingly and clearly not the same power it used to be prior to the campaign of the beeper attacks and the walkie-talkie attacks, and then the robust strikes that the IDF has conducted on all of its facilities pretty much within a time span of 1 week to 2 weeks, not more than that. Well, what can you identify as being the most crucial point to focus on within this context?
The crucial point to focus on is that the Lebanese armed forces are not going to secure the south. They're simply not going to do it,
right,
which is what the agreement calls for. And what Hezbollah, using a variety of tactics that we're all familiar with, is going to try to re-insinuate itself back into the life of southern Lebanon, and the Israelis are simply going to strike wherever they see Hezbollah coming together in any kind of position of strength. The Israelis are going to strike it. They're going to do that in Lebanon. They're going to do it in Syria as well.
We're running out of time. You noted the 3 points that President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke together on and focused on. We covered the Iranian angle. We covered the Gazan angle. Syria.
It looks to me like they didn't talk much about Syria. I think Syria is there isn't a clear American policy on Syria right now, as far as I can tell.
Very interesting.
Unfortunately, this is always the case with Syria. It's always an afterthought in American policy. This has nothing to do with the Trump administration. This is when I was in the White House, 2005 to 7. We never had a Syria policy. We had a Syria director, the officer in the White House responsible for Syria, under me. And when he left, in the White House, you borrow people from the other agencies, and he had to go back to his home agency. And we talked about who should replace him, and we said, "How about the photocopy machine?" Because we had continued to send the same memo up to the president for decision. Never got an answer.
Amazing. Well, you did mention a couple of weeks ago that the state of Syria is not necessarily important, but the land of Syria is of crucial strategic importance. Where do we converge here?
Yeah, I think that I wouldn't say this. If I said that the state of Israel, the state of Syria is not important, I exaggerated. I mean, of course it's important, but the United States has no four-star economic asset in Syria. It has no history of serious engagement with Syria, and yet for everyone else in the region, this is the place where the regional order is being negotiated. That's why we have some 5 or 6 different militaries on the ground well, I guess the Russians are gone now, and the Iranians are gone. So what are we left with? The Americans, the Turks, and the Israelis. And there's not even much of a Syrian army anymore either. But we had all those militaries there because this is where the regional order is being negotiated.
Al-Desham, right?
Yes.
All historic empires understood to conquer the Levant, including also Jerusalem, you need to control Damascus first. But we have a couple seconds left and not enough time to dive deeper into the various intricacies of the Syrian file. Nonetheless, in 2 words, the situation is not fluid, and it seems like there are increasing tensions within Syria, not necessarily from the international community towards Syria. Do you see the current HTS regime successfully consolidate power in Damascus, absent support from Sweda, from Al-Hasaka, and the other regions that are so crucial?
I think it depends on the negotiations that go on between the United States and the Turks. Syria is under pressure from Israel from the south and from the Turks from the north. And if the United States steps in and can create a balance between Israel and Turkey, and can assure the Turks that their interests will be their vital interests will be respected in Syria, and it can assure the Israelis of that as well, then a space will be created for a stable Syrian government. But that has to be negotiated, and the only power in the world that can conduct that negotiation is the United States.
On that we agree upon, absolutely. Well, this is all the time that we have for today. Dr. Mike Duran, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition of Deep Dive featuring Hudson Institute from here in Jerusalem, wishing you a good day.